Hi, I'm Bob Ethington.
And I'm Nick Nicholas.
And this is From Akron and Beyond. So on this episode, we are keeping it from Akron, pretty much, but we were talking about how one community is going beyond, and with a revitalization program and kind of a renaissance. It's very exciting. We have three people here who are all have been working in Kenmore and bringing Kenmore to some new heights of artistic expression and restaurants and great music, and it's really exciting to have all three of them here. One is Corey Jenkins. He's a musician who many of our listeners are probably familiar with. He's played in a lot of bands, Big Pop, Fancy Legs, amongst others, and he was very involved in the beginning of this project in Kenmore. We have Jim Ballard, who I know many of you will know. He's a longtime fixture in the music scene around here. Dare I call him legendary, Nick?
Yes, legendary.
Okay, when we say if you get old enough, you're legendary. So congratulations, Jim. And we have Tina Brode here as well. And Nick, I thought I'd let you start with Tina.
Yeah, Tina sort of got the ball rolling here. I mean, Kenmore is a great community. You know, there's so much going on there. From when I was, late teens, going to Lay's guitar shop, and later on having my kids going to the comic book store and the train store. You know,
the bargain basement. Perhaps? Yeah, musician bargain basement.
I remember going. Me and Jerry, my band, a former incarnation of a music store that was there for a while, and had 2 floors, and Jerry bought Jim Ballard was working there at the time too, but Jerry bought a set of strings. I remember as we were going down, set of strings coming down. You know, it was just it was the only sale that day. Anyway, Tina, tell us, you helped get this thing, the ball rolling, and what was your title at the beginning?
I was the founding executive director of the Kenmore Neighborhood Alliance. So we're the organization that kind of grew out of a grassroots movement to, people saw good things in the neighborhood and they said, we need to build on our assets, not just complain about our problems. And we found quickly that one of our biggest assets were our musicians and our music shops and just the scene that was underground, but some people knew about, but everyone should know about. So. And
Jim, back then you had probably the only recording studio in Kenmore? At one time, I'm talking about 30-something years.
Yeah, likely.
And now there are how many?
A dozen or so anyway, right?
Yeah, there's at least 6 that we know of right on Kenmore Boulevard in those main 3 blocks. So, there's a nice concentration of creative activity happening at any given day or any given time. So it's really cool.
Think how amazing that is. In such a short amount of time that there's half a dozen recording studios within a block or so?
Yeah, that's 3 blocks. And I'll say that there were folks who were already there, and I guess that's where we need to start. Kenmore has always been a very strong musicians community, working musicians community. Right. Not your arts district per se, but more of your working man's musician, type of place. So you've got the, Lay's obviously is legendary, but you also have the guitar department. We used to have musicians bargain basement, which is kind of legendary in its own right.
That's the one I meant.
Yeah. So, there were studios on the boulevard that people didn't know about, and we were able to uncover those.
Yeah.
And now there are a couple live clubs. I mean, but besides the Rialto, is there a new one too?
Yeah, so the Buzzbin Art and Music Shop, which was in Canton, it was a fixture in Canton downtown for, my gosh, more than a decade.
Yeah.
And Corey went out and got the Buzzbin. It worked out really well for us. Yeah,
that was quite a coup, because that was definitely Buzzbin was a big place in Canton. And to get them to move to Kenmore was really quite an accomplishment.
Well, we jumped on it. We saw the article that said they were losing their space in Canton, and I emailed them right away. And now 2 weeks ago or whatever, Tommy Stinson from the Replacements and Guns N' Roses and Soul Asylums on Kenmore Boulevard. So
he was cool too. I went to one of those shows, and that was really fun.
Oh yeah, that was a real treat. Yeah.
Performing their hit single in Guam Dream. Tommy Stinson's Cowboys in the Campfire.
There you go. Thanks, Corey.
Jim, we go back a really long time. I was your manager for like a month. What was that like?
What was your company called, Nick? Dead or Alive Productions?
I don't know. I think it was called Guerrilla Productions at the time. I had some business cards, and I think I got 3 different performers, 4 or 5 gigs. But I found out recently that one of the gigs I got Jimmy, there was a bullet hole in a guitar case.
Yeah, when I started the gig, there wasn't. But a little later there was.
Great.
Yeah, when I packed up to leave in the middle of the, I wasn't going to stay for that. So
yeah.
I think the owner of the bar said temperamental artists.
They care about their lives,
Yeah. Aren't you going to stay and play the second set? No.
But you've been around for so long, and I've seen your different incarnations over acoustic to that great gig I saw you at Red's. Where you had an electric band, and now tell us a little bit what you're doing now.
Well, same thing, back and forth between solo and with a band. I have I think the best band I've ever had right now, the Strangs. And in fact, we just did a Studio C here recently. And we play in the area. We're not going to tour. We're all kind of past that. But we play in the area probably half a dozen times a year. And then I play with one or more of them at other sort of unplugged events. And then I play solo. So I keep busy throughout the year doing that.
Good.
Same songs, different way,
Tina, was there a lot of funding from, grant type of things to get this thing going? How did all the support happen?
So the way it really started is I had just moved back to my neighborhood. I'm a 5th-generation resident. I'd grown up there and, seen the music scene there in the past, but kind of forgotten how vibrant it is and was. And I had an opportunity to lead something called the Better Block, which was a 2-day event, the Kenmore Better Block. There have been several in Akron, but our Kenmore Better Block was a 2-day event that really did focus on music. Yes, revitalizing the space around us, getting vacant buildings filled with businesses that the neighbors told us they wanted to see, cleaning up the space, adding some good crosswalks and some pedestrian and bike-friendly infrastructure temporarily. But, in the process of planning that, I was able to uncover that we had these, at the time, 5 recording studios on Kenmore Boulevard. And I got to know each one of these guys, and Jim, of course, too, being a fixture in the community for so long. We got together and we said, how do we revitalize through the arts as well? So I was able to get some funding through the Knight Foundation to fund the initial Better Block event. Jim and others got together and kind of had a cool idea, this doesn't cost any money, it just costs time. Could we put together a song that is an homage to Kenmore and Kenmore Boulevard, but leverage each of our assets and each of our capabilities to do the thing? And a really cool thing manifested called Bones of the Boulevard. Jim, I think, had already written this song. It was pretty much in the bag. He hadn't recorded it yet. And he can tell you a little more about that, but what came out of it was something that got us even more legs, I think, in the community, don't you think?
Hopefully. That was kind of the idea. At the very beginning of this, we had little meetings at people's homes. There'd be 15 or 20 people there, and we would talk about the general thing, and then break up into small groups. And I happened to break up into just a 2-person group with Todd Ederer, and he's a real estate fella who owns several buildings on the boulevard and is doing nice things with them. That his whole idea was to do that. But that he was involved in this. But I sat down with him, a real estate guy and a songwriter, and I thought, how can I talk to this guy, in real estate ease?
Yeah.
And so I said to him, Todd, the boulevard has great bones. And I immediately took out my iPhone and wrote down that note. And in a couple of days, I had it written. And But the thing that we did, and Tina mentioned bringing so many things together, the thing that we wanted to do with this was I wanted it to not be just me or just my studio. So we recorded parts of it in 4 different studios, and there were 4 or 5 other musicians. For instance, Zach was in on it, Zach Friedoff, and Nate Vale was in on it. Thomas Kincaid was on it. We filmed the video with all these other folks involved in it because we wanted it to have this synergy of Kenmore, not just Jim in his studio. So the Bones of the Boulevard that you hear was a result of that coming together of all those energies.
It's actually a great song, man.
Oh, thank you.
So what do you guys find are some of the main challenges you've had in this project? I imagine there's several. They could be some significant ones.
Well, Nick, you mentioned funding.
Yeah.
There's never enough funding to do it just with funding. So you kind of have to leverage. Mm-hmm. You look around, I mean, the musicians are definitely assets and the music businesses are assets. But, as you probably know, oftentimes musicians are the ones that are seeking opportunities for funding, not always bringing the funding. And we felt it was our responsibility to go out and find those resources and not just funding, but
I'm
other partners.
That's always the case.
Where you're going to get the funding from.
Right. No. Well, and honestly, if you're building on that, like we wanted to bring resources to that, and I didn't think it was fair, particularly with the businesses. We want to help the businesses, we want to help the artists, we want to bring the funding from outside and the resources from outside because our community has been one that has honestly been overlooked. I think, kind of that, we're almost 1 foot out of Akron. That it's kind of that perspective, but there's so much opportunity there and so many good people doing some great things. So. The funding was a challenge, but we were able to partner with some other organizations, including the city of Akron, including the Summit County Land Bank, including, we mentioned Todd Ederer. He owns several buildings on Kenmore Boulevard. We would not have a buzz bin right now on Kenmore Boulevard if Todd Ederer hadn't bought an old bar in the courtyard next door. And frankly, one of the interesting things Jim was also involved in was we took that bar after Better Block. We saw the legs that this was growing and said, we need to keep the momentum going. So we operated a live music venue. Our organization, on all volunteer. I mean, it was literally all volunteer. We operated a music venue for 6 months. And we found out that as a nonprofit, we could pull a beer permit and a liquor permit twice a month. So we had 2-day events basically twice a month. The first Thursday, Friday, and the third Thursday, Friday of every month. And we took the momentum we have with the artists and musicians and studio owners and said, could each of you take a night? Every month, each of you is going to have a night to book. So, Jim, I think you had the third Thursday of every month. He mentioned Zach Friedoff, Zach and the Big Love Network, which is now housed in Kenmore. They ended up finding a building in Kenmore off of Kenmore Boulevard. They had a night where Zach's friends, would come. He would find folks who'd be willing to pay just for the door. I mean, we never kept any of the door money for the organization. Alcohol sales, fine. But our goal was to show that musicians can make money in Kenmore and that they're valued here. And we also had Open Tone Music. They have an academy that operates with young kids, learning from trained jazz musicians and folks that have taught, one of the teachers taught at Oberlin, was a professor at Oberlin for more than a decade. So these are folks who know their stuff, and they're training our kids to say, hey, this is helping me with my math. Like I understand things a little better by playing this music. And the families, we're engaging them too. So we invited Matt Garrett, who's with the band Easton Union that is played on the Summit a lot. He managed a night for us where we always had jazz. And then Thomas Kincaid, who owns Studio 1008, which was one of the existing studios when we kicked off this whole revitalization, we gave him a night and said, hey, each of these folks had different genres. So Jim brought his friends who are mostly singer-songwriter folks, well-established followings. So we were able to showcase that, this is a place for you too. Like, yes, you go see them in the Valley, or Hudson Akron or wherever else, but you can also see them in a place like this and you'll be welcomed. So, I felt like that, yes, that created some funding, but more importantly, it created, kind of a vibe where there was not just rock and roll, not just hip hop, but all these different types of arts and genres coming together in a place that hadn't necessarily seen the support from the fan base, and they were bringing the fan base, so that was helpful. Yeah.
Well, I know that I play in a band that played one of the first Fridays, and the band's called Glen Leisure, I should mention. And we've played at the Rialto, and
so have we.
And the Bizarros have too, of course. And I've seen many shows there, and both at Rialto and at the first Fridays. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because, and this is a sensitive topic, but I think it's worth discussing, is that when you are doing a project like this, you also have to fight preconceptions, right? Because I was really surprised, frankly shocked, when I was talking to some friends of mine who, and I was, of course, hyping my gig. It's First Friday and it's so much fun. It's great, and it is. It's so much fun. All the people that are out, all the different music that's playing, all the great food. It's just a great time. And I guess I was probably talking to about 8 or 9 guys, and a couple of them were kind of like, well, I don't know, Kenmore, man. I've heard that's kind of dangerous there, isn't it? And I'm like, that's not been my experience. Not when I've been there. None of these days you feel not only 100% safe, it's totally fun. It's just a great time. People are having a ball. But it really hit me. I thought, wow, there's still kind of that...
It's still
stigma there or something.
It's still there. I hear that. Those comments once in a while.
You had asked earlier what some of the obstacles were, and that's when Tina talked about the finances. But my first thought for me is exactly that. That we're fighting the perception all the time, and it's taken us. I think we've been at this about 7 years or so, and it's taken us that long to get this far, which is far. We have a long way to go.
Yeah.
But it takes one little thing to happen, and it all ratchets back again because of the perception. And the other thing that I've found, and I don't mean it in any detrimental way, but the folks that are hardest to get to come to Kenmore are former Kenmore residents who moved out of Kenmore because it got bad.
Really?
Right.
And that's the last thing they remember, and they have a bad taste in their mouth. Or like you say, folks who have never been to Kenmore.
Right.
I've run on the towpath for years and years and years, and back in, I think, 2009, they opened the part next to Summit Lake where you could run on a towpath. And so I immediately, the first day, began running there, and it's always been just fine. But when I would tell runner friends not from around Kenmore or Akron, you need to come down to towpath because it's really unique when you come through Kenmore. Oh, I don't know. It seems a little, I bet that's interesting, and I know what they mean.
Yeah.
And it is interesting, but in a really, really good way.
Yeah.
And so, for me, it's the perception. I know Corey wanted to say something. I jumped on the mic, but that's really important that you bring that up.
Okay, yeah.
Well, that's a funny thing, and for me, I've never felt that way. And my grandma spent 80 years of her life in Kenmore. My parents grew up there, and when I was 3, we moved out of Kenmore into Greene, which is where I grew up. But I still constantly went back to Kenmore, whether it was to see family or to go to, the bargain basement or guitar department, or, when I hit my 20s, maybe some extended lunches at some of the local pubs. But I never, even the quote unquote maybe wilderness years for the neighborhood, I never personally felt that way. However, regardless of how I've felt, it is a perception, and it's a PR issue. And one of the ways to overcome that is to leverage, the assets that Tina and Jim talked about that were already existing in the neighborhood, and that's the music. So by taking the music, when I came on board with Kenmore Neighborhood Alliance, now Better Kenmore, one of the things I did was I really wanted to make it, whether it was the Rialto or First Friday, a place that musicians were excited to play, wanted to play. And we did the Kenmore Winter Break festivals. And, First Friday, we brought a stage out onto the street and kind of, ratcheted some things up a bit because, Yeah, funding's a thing, and musicians want to get paid, but if they perceive a prestige there, they want to play it no matter what. When I was 16, all I did was dream about playing the Lime Spider. Now there are plenty of bands that just want to play Porch Rocker, and they do it for free, and it's the most work of any show of the year.
Yeah, you're not kidding.
So
hottest day of the year.
Maybe if you come play, play a First Friday or something else, you might not have big city municipal paychecks coming at you, but you'll get something. But making it something that people are excited to play, want to play, feel like they're missing out if they can't play it. That's been a thing that I've really tried to do since I've been involved.
Yeah. Well, that's been, from my perspective, that's definitely been the case. I've always had a great experience when we've played out there at the Rialto and the First Friday. It's been a great time. And you do feel very well taken care of, respected, and people are there to enjoy the music. So you've succeeded there for sure.
I was just going to mention, I think a lot of this perception changes when you experience it. So I'm sure,
Absolutely.
even those of you who have had great times there, I'm sure there's been a little bit of oh, that should be interesting. I'm not quite sure what to expect. And I think that was the goal of the Better Block event. It wasn't just to put a plan together that's this thick and send it to the city and put it on a shelf somewhere and hope it gets done. It was to actually guerrilla market the area by changing it, by physically going down there, making small changes, fast changes, cheap, inexpensive changes, and getting out there and saying, okay, this is what it would feel like if that thick plan actually happened. And I think it's much the same with folks who maybe don't have a great impression of the community. It's probably because frankly, Corey mentioned it, it's probably because they haven't spent the time there.
Right.
And, yes, sometimes it's hard to convince former residents to come back because they remember their teen years much differently than maybe they actually were.
Sure. Right.
But, to put things out on the street, to have things outside, to engage the businesses with the outside, people feel much more comfortable. It's disarming to come down and hear a really great band play on the street, have a really great beer from a local brewer, and walk around and shop some of the shops. It's not like you have to go inside behind doors and, fend for yourself back to your car. We're all together. And even when you do, frankly, I'm 5'3" and about 115 pounds, and I've had no problem going back to my car at 1 o'clock in the morning on Kenmore Boulevard. So, for what that's worth. But most people have to experience that, and that's why we do the things that we do.
Yeah,
and to add to that, I'm glad you said that, because I meant to say that, by then having the bands playing there that people want to come see, that forces them to come to the community and check it out and see what's going on. It's come, experience it, and see what it's actually like.
Right.
Yeah, it strikes me as we're talking about those things, the three of us who are guests here, I'm the only one who lives in Kenmore this whole time. And Tina grew up in Kenmore, and she and her husband Ryan lived in other places and made a decision to come back to Kenmore, whereas they could have lived anywhere they would like. And same with Corey. Corey's family has history in Kenmore, and he grew up in another place too. But they're drawn back to Kenmore along with people who are already there, and that's that kind of alliance. Having said that, we've only mentioned peripherally the Rialto. And for me, my brother and I used to talk about refurbing the boulevard 20 years ago, and he's an architect, and we've talked about these kind of things and how we would do it. We had no idea what the ropes were until Tina came along and the Rialto came along. And before we started any of the Better Block ideas and the meetings we were having, Seth and Nate, also from another area, didn't grow up in Kenmore, probably weren't familiar much with Kenmore, but they found this building that could be a theater. They're touring musicians, so they know the ropes on that. And they found this place, and they took everything they had, money, time, energy, gambled everything, and bought this building and lived upstairs in it. You should have seen it. But they took a chance. And when I first went down to meet them, there wasn't much happening yet. And there were probably 20 boarded up businesses on the boulevard now, whereas now there are virtually none.
Yeah.
And just in that amount of time, those two guys, and there were places there already, the comic book store and places like that, that were there and been there for a long time. But somehow or another, this lit the fuse a little bit and became an anchor, and everything began to build around it. But those two guys they just had faith and they had vision. Along comes Tina with all that same thing, faith and vision and energy to, she won't say it, but she was the keystone of pulling so many things together, so many energies, and she had the vision to know that you have to have business and you have to have politics, but you needed to have the art too, which we know as artists, we don't always get included or asked our opinions on those things. But Tina said, no, that's who we're asking. That's how we're going to guide this. And so there I am again, bloviating.
By the way, my wife went to Kenmore, I think, for the first time. I got her to go see Bob's band, there at the last Friday event you had there, and she loved the place. I mean, she's from the Cleveland area, never heard anything negative or positive about Kenmore, but it was a really great experience for her.
This is From Akron and Beyond. I'm Bob Ethington with my co-host, Nick Nicholas. We are talking to Corey Jenkins, Jim Ballard, and Tina Boyes all about Kenmore and all the exciting things that are going on in Kenmore now. I would be remiss if I did not mention our friend and musical colleague at times, Chris Butler.
Oh, yeah.
And the kind of amazing space that he has built there. And when you guys were talking just a little bit ago about the sort of passion and energy that people are bringing to the community, Chris and Beth Becker epitomize that. I mean, what they've done with that space is amazing.
Yeah, there's two people that could have gone anywhere in the country and done what they're doing in Kenmore.
Yeah, literally they could have.
Or the world.
Yeah. And it's for Chris, it's self-serving in a way because it's a studio for him to do his various projects and for Beth to do her artistic projects. But then it's also opening up to other musicians and other people that are pursuing a variety of different artistic endeavors. So I just think that's really exciting. And since he's somebody I know real well, it's just been a real sort of like me seeing that space go from virtually nothing to really a beautiful place now. And it's just, I think kind of indicative of the kind of work that's going on in Kenmore now.
I was in there visiting him yesterday, actually. But, the seeds for all that were planted after that Pin Too Hot show that we played, Bob, at the Rialto.
Really?
The next morning, he sent an email to me along with Seth and Nate Vale from the Rialto saying, if you know of any spaces available on the boulevard, let me know.
Wow.
Which I then sent immediately to Tina, who jumped on it, and he saw a couple spaces and ended up liking that one, which fittingly was an A&P grocery store, which if you know the Christmas wrapping line.
Right.
Yeah.
That is funny. I didn't realize that. Yeah. Oh, that's hilarious.
Yeah, without saying any names, I've had long-time career musicians from the area ask me about what's going on with real estate prices in Kenmore. So some people are kind of thinking a little bit about being drawn to the area and the energy, so that's a cool thing too.
Beautiful.
And get in quick, probably, huh? Because it's going to go up, I'll bet.
Well, hopefully they're not just speculators,
Yeah. Well, one of the exciting things that is on the horizon, and I don't know how much you follow the Board of Education and some of the decisions that have been made recently, but Kenmore, one of the hard things over the past 5 to 10 years has been the loss of our high school, which those who don't realize, Kenmore was a city before it was part of Akron, and Kenmore High School preceded the city of Akron's involvement in our community, and to see that close was a big hit to the social construct of the community. I mean, people were starting to lose hope, but that was really felt like the nail in the coffin, and frankly, we have lost some folks and families because of that, but in the meantime, the current school board had been trying to figure out what to do with their Miller South School for the Visual and Performing Arts. It's also in a building that is long overdue for repairs or even demolition. And we have a grade school that, we're down to 3 grade schools and a middle school in Akron's second largest neighborhood. We felt like that was worth fighting for. So long story short, the board decided they were going to rebuild Miller South for the School for the Visual and Performing Arts and Pfeiffer Elementary School on the former Kenmore High School campus, which happens to be a block away from where all of this exciting stuff is happening.
Well, that's really great.
It really is, because then you can start weaving in, the Jims, the Coreys, the Seth and Nates of the world, and say, there are things for you to learn. We want you to be edified by our experience, but we also want to learn from you. And there's an interesting give and take that starts to happen with different generations, and I'm really excited to see. Yeah,
and that brings in a whole educational component that can interact. Yeah. That's fantastic. Yeah.
Well, I think that's how you build. You kind of secure the neighborhood's future, right? Is kids come over there and they feel a connection with the neighborhood and the businesses and the people, and then when it's time for them to figure out where they want to live and where they want to be, they'll choose a place like Kenmore. Because even I'll tell you, I've never felt a sense of community anywhere like what you feel there.
The whole Miller South idea also, it not only introduces them to a number of arts, but to the artists themselves, which is kind of coffee house bohemian society now. They can not only go down to the boulevard to a venue or a music shop, but they can go to a cafe, which, there's a little cafe society happening, which appeals to kids who are more artistically inclined. The other thing about that, too, is that it's a silver lining to be able to have the school. It's not Kenmore High School any longer, but what it will be was that it will belong to the community. Yeah. And the kids that will attend it won't just be from Kenmore, they'll be from all over Akron. So that's kind of cool, too, because their parents will be drawn to Kenmore necessarily just to bring them over.
Perfect.
And again, hopefully getting rid of some of these perceptions.
So there's sort of sounds like you guys kind of have a little kismet working for you. I mean, some of those things were out of your control, right? With the schools and stuff. I mean, luckily, maybe not for some of the people that were there for the last few years, but the art school has to move. So, hey, what do you know? You guys have an opening for it. You have the place. And that's, I mean, you can't count on that kind of stuff, but and of course, it's you guys using your initiative to see that these openings are coming up and that you can strike while the iron's hot, as it were. But that's exciting, though.
It is. And honestly, I think that's really what community development is you have to be an opportunist a little bit, much like an artist. Like, you have to look for your windows, and not everyone's going to see the linkages and connections, but an artist or a creative, and I consider, I come from a marketing and writing background, like, there's certain mindsets where you're looking, even things that are bad, there's always ways to maneuver in those to advantage yourself. And I think Kenmore does a really good job of, we're sad for a minute, but then we're like, okay, we got to hustle and make something happen. And when we saw those things starting to fall out of place, in place, what have you, we said, this is something, if you repeat it enough and you show up enough, hopefully it happens. And that's honestly how a CDC happened in Kenmore. That's how the Better Block happened. I literally just started repeating, Kenmore needs a Better Block. You know what? It's really time that Kenmore has a CDC, don't you think? And I would just repeat it over and over. Some other people continued to repeat it, and, they got tired of hearing from us, I guess, and they adopted it. So, it's cool. It's kind of all linked, honestly. Sure. It's the same mindset.
Oh, yeah. No, it's not all luck. It's persistence.
A lot of hard work.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Well, it's a community of resourceful people. And actually, one person who I think, lends himself to being an analogy for that would be Virgil Lay, who we named a street after
Tell us about that.
Year.
How difficult was that to do? Well, first of all, tell us about Virgil.
Well, I was just going to say, Virgil... so Virgil Lay, he started Lay's Guitar Shop, and he ran that until the late 70s when he started focusing on SIT guitar strings, which he also started on Kenmore Boulevard. And I actually, in my early 20s, worked at SIT with Virgil, so I got to know him, and he was always excited to teach. But the thing about him that I learned right away, and he was like this till the very, very end, was he was very resourceful. No matter what he had to do, he got it done with whatever was at his disposal. And sometimes maybe it wasn't pretty, but it got the job done and it felt good, and you had the intended outcome. So I guess that was kind of where I was going with that. He's very resourceful. Like whatever I got, I'm going to use, and it'll work. So
Jim, tell why is he such a legend? I mean, he was more than just a guy that worked on guitars. I mean, he was like a master, right?
That's why he's a legend. He was a master, and he took care of Chet Atkins guitars and Joe Walsh's
that's
guitars.
Why I want to hear
Jimmy
like
Page and so on. They would quietly bring or have brought their guitars down to downtown Kenmore to Virgil when he lived over off of, was it 13th Street, right?
That's where he was.
Yeah, where he was in the beginning at the little downstairs, you step down into it place. But he was there for years and years before I ever even started playing.
We actually used to go to his brother had a shop too on Route 8.
Yes.
Remember that?
That's right.
Yeah.
Raylay.
Yeah. Really near Temple Square, if I remember right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. I didn't know any of that about
I was there maybe 15 years ago getting some work done for one of our guys in our band, and there were all these boxes that said Martin guitar, and I questioned it, and basically they did a lot of the repair work for Martin even to this day, right?
Mm-hmm. Just for the company. You mean? Yeah. Wow.
I mean, that's like kind of history that nobody really knows about.
Yeah. And obviously within those rarefied circles, it carried on. If it's Chet Atkins and Jimmy Page, these are guys that could get their guitars fixed anywhere. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Musicians, guitar players specifically, have been drawn to Kenmore Boulevard at least since the early 60s, But, to answer your question about how did it happen that the Kenmore South Alley was named Virgil A. Way, he was somebody who was always on my mind since I'd worked for him, and everybody has a Virgil story if you're a musician of it, at least even my age. Tina and I were taking a walk one day, and I had the idea, but in terms of how hard it was to make it happen, I'll let Tina tell that, because I just had the idea. She did the work.
Well, so I always start out, and a lot of musicians know this story, but, not everyone realizes that, yes, Joe Walsh was a frequent customer of Lay's Guitar Shop. And as Corey mentioned, or may not have mentioned, folks who are in the guitar business like to swap and try, and let me try yours. Oh my gosh, what's that over there, right? So Jimmy Page had liked a guitar that Joe Walsh had, I believe, and he had reached out and said, hey, I'm looking for a Gibson Burst, this is what I'm looking for. And Joe, being a frequent customer of Lay's, said, well, I've got two. I'll ship them out to you, give them a try, see which one you like. And Joe Walsh ended up shipping him what ended up becoming Jimmy Page's number one, like the legendary guitar played on, how many Led Zeppelin albums and live, how many times, like the guitar. Virgil Lay touched that guitar, and that's how it ended up in, by way of Joe Walsh, it ended up in Jimmy Page's hands, which that's the kind of stuff when you're a neighborhood like us or a city like us, like you have to gravitate towards those things. They're legends, but they're real, and we should celebrate them. And so I was able to go down to the city and talk to the zoning person and said, listen, this is important. Like, this is important to Akron, not just Kenmore. This is a guy who should be recognized. So it wasn't a lot of work, but Corey designed a really cool sign. We've already had one stolen. I'm not trying to... Two! Oh my gosh. Two stolen. So there's a market for them. We need to start pumping them out there, I guess. But it's a nice reminder that every time you drive down that back alley, and that's the way to access all those parking lots behind the Rialto, you get to see Virgil Lay's name.
Hey, Jimmy, is it a fact that the fellow who invented the Echoplex was from Akron? He had a little shop there on East Market Street. Remember? Or did you hear that?
Yeah, that is... I don't know if he was on East Market.
Yeah, for a while he was. He had whatever his name was, something Electrics.
Was his name Roger, maybe?
I can't remember his name. Right by where the Mercedes place is now. There on East Market.
I'd have to look up his name. He and Virgil were friends, actually, because I remember working when I worked at SIT. Virgil said he was going to have lunch with his friend who invented the Echoplex.
Yeah, I remember maybe 20-something years ago, Jerry still went to his house, like in the Talmadge area, to buy a tape, because it was like a tape system.
Yeah, you'd have to put the tapes in there. Yeah.
By the way, that whole that old question from Nick about the Virgil A. Way. He has an ulterior motive with that. Look for Nick Nicholas Boulevard coming near you soon. Now, how again did you go about doing that? What's the paperwork involved in that?
Pizarro's Boulevard.
Down by the canal. That's where it's got. That's where it has to be.
So this is From Akron and Beyond. I'm Bob Ethington with my co-host Nick Nicholas, and we're talking all things Kenmore with Corey Jenkins, Jim Ballard, and Tina Boyle. And as we're beginning to run out of time here, I just want to ask sort of a big idealistic question of all three of you. What is a grand goal that you maybe have that you maybe are even a little shy about talking about, but something else you'd like to achieve in the Kenmore area with the project that you're doing, over the next 5 years, maybe 3 years, something like that. Do you have any grand goals like that?
I guess I would like to see, we're basically in a 3 or 4 block section right now that's things are really happening in.
Yes.
I'd like to see that extend a little further. Mm-hmm. And the other thing I'd like to see, and there again, this is one of the things Tina has kept everybody focused on, is the idea that we want this to be a Summit County thing, a Northeast Ohio thing, but we want the Kenmore community and the Kenmore neighborhood and the people who live in houses in Kenmore to really still own this and be involved in it and help it grow, so that gentrification is a word we've tried to stay away from. Mm-hmm. We want it to belong to the people of Kenmore. And we think, for me, all boats rise when you do that. So, yeah, I think it's going the right direction. Mm-hmm. We just need to keep going that direction and let it begin to help it begin to grow.
Sure.
And be all-inclusive.
Yeah, that's exciting.
The musician side of me wants it to just become the most musician-friendly district in Northeast Ohio, and I really want it to be a place where musicians want to be, are drawn to, and supported. And then the Kenmore native community side of me really wants the revitalization to just continue. And I would love to get to the point where it can be 2:30 in the morning and you see crowds of people, walking, leaving places, going back and forth between venues and businesses. I really want it to be a thriving, vibrant, exciting place to be.
And as a resident of the neighborhood, I'll tell you, all this started out because I wanted to be able to go have dinner, run into a neighbor doing it, maybe go see a show, hear a really good band, have a beer somewhere, and maybe some coffee nightcap, and run into another neighbor. For me, it's about the social cohesion. I think we've lost so much and even in Akron, everything is very disparate now.
Yes.
And we don't need tribes. We don't need tribalism, but we need to feel pride of place. And when you can go out and see people and you can run into people accidentally instead of having to always plan, that feels good. It feels like a place that's for you and for people like you. Mm-hmm. And, I just really want to see my kids desire to stay in the neighborhood, to give back to the neighborhood, not be like me and aspire to get out,
right.
And I think we've seen that far too much, particularly in, later boomer generation, but definitely Gen X. We bailed. We said, this is not for me. I'm going to do something great somewhere else. But there's some of us that are coming back, and a lot of folks are choosing to stay. And I think, if we can give them something to stay for, they will. And I think that's our goal. Yeah.
That's been kind of a subtle theme of our podcast, our shows, really, is that Akron somehow maintains, a city of it with its history and of its size. Many other comparable cities in the country have really kind of failed, and yet Akron keeps moving, and Kenmore is doing the exact same thing, and that's really exciting.
Yeah, Chris Butler came back. Dave Giffords is still writing about why it's great to be here.
Yeah, people who never left, and then people who. A common theme has been people who left and then come back. Yeah. They're actually, Akron was pretty cool. It was a very comfortable place to live. So that is an exciting thing. So we've had on today Tina Boyes, who I think I pronounced your last name wrong the last time I did that. So sorry, that's my handwriting. I blame that. Corey Jenkins, Jim Ballard, Tina Boyes. Thanks to all three of you for being here.
Thank you. It was a great show today, man. Thank you.
And this is one we've been wanting to do because we've been excited about all the great things going on out in Kenmore, and really had you guys on the list for quite a while. So we're glad we could get you all in.
Thanks for having us.
Sure, you bet.
Appreciate it.
Okay, this has been From Akron and Beyond. We'll see you next time.